It was a wonderful gift to attend each of the sessions led by Tim Moore this last weekend. Wonderful because I was able to hear your ideas about theology, about what we're doing during Lent and Easter, about what you think is the point of baptism and communion. You are all very good at thinking theologically, and I loved getting to listen. One of the questions Tim asked was about how we would each rank the following: belief, belonging, behavior. So if you weren't at any of the sessions, think now for a minute about what you'd put first in terms of covenant's priorities: belief, belonging, behavior. When it was my turn to answer this, I struggled. They all swirl together in my mind, almost a chicken and egg thing. Don't my beliefs impact my behavior, and doesn't my behavior affect my belonging? And then isn't the reverse also true? My belonging to a group certainly influences my behavior, and those two bring alterations to my beliefs. But what's most important at covenant? I'm tempted to say that belief is at the bottom, but when I'm tempted to do this, it's because I'm referencing the churches that raised me, and not this church, not our church, not Covenant Church, an ecumenical, liberal congregation. If by belief we mean doctrine, like in the churches that raised me, then yeah, I think it's at the bottom. You'll find a variety of beliefs at Covenant when it comes to doctrines like the virgin birth or the full divinity of Jesus or a bodily resurrection, what's needed for salvation, and so forth. Other beliefs, you'll find a lot of consistency. For example, who should be welcomed? Everyone. What are we trying to do in our efforts to follow Jesus? Well, we're trying to love and bring justice and peace. Who can take communion? Everyone. Always, always everyone. We do have beliefs that most of us agree mostly on. And it seems to me that those beliefs directly impact our ecumenism, our openness, our priorities. They directly impact our belonging and our behavior. I'm not saying belief is the most important. I'm just saying it is important. Speaking of belief, today is Trinity Sunday. I'm not going to ask if you're a triune believer or not. The Trinity is one model for God. It is by no means the only model for God. It can be helpful, and if it's held too tightly, if it's turned from model and metaphor into dogma and doctrine, it can be used to limit, to contain. It can be used as a test, as a line to determine who is in and who is out. Our models for God matter. They matter because each of us has a picture, a set of assumptions, often not even conscious of how we think God and the world are related. And all any of us can do is express through our words and actions who we think God is and who we think we are. These unconscious or implicit theologies are very powerful. They control many of our decisions and actions. We rely on them as justification for what we're doing as people and as communities. Theology matters. Our metaphors, models, images, ideas for God matter. They matter not just because wars have been fought over them, and not just to provide distinction among religious organizations, and not even just because they're interesting. Our models of God, our theologies, directly impact our beliefs, our meaning making. For example, imagining God as loving friend has a different impact on our theology than imagining God as critical judge. Theology matters because our understandings of God affect our lives, our actions, our ideals, our mental and physical health, our communities. Theology is directly linked to how we connect or disconnect ourselves to others. It determines who's given ear and who's ignored, who's privileged and who's oppressed. Theology matters. The interplay of theology and decision-making has been on display of late in the Texas legislature, as effort after effort has been made to exclude and control. To exclude trans children from health care, from acceptance, from freedom within our state. To control women's bodies and choices. To stamp out the teaching of the destructive realities of racism in our schools. To keep people from voting. All the while, the word freedom is being applied to permitless carry. Most of the leaders in the Texas legislature claim to be Christians. They often mention God when discussing their current death-dealing policies. If you understand God as judge, as one who hates and condemns, who excludes and punishes, then it follows that you would want to emulate that God. I don't know any way to combat bad theology except to do so with good theology. In today's lection, Nicodemus, a religious leader, comes to Jesus at night to ask a question. I assume he's coming at night because he doesn't want to be seen, doesn't want anyone to know that he has theological questions. Surety is a clear sign of bad theology. And then Nicodemus insists on taking Jesus literally. Not literally when Jesus says, love your neighbor. Not literally when Jesus says, the poor, the mourning, the persecuted are blessed. Not literally when Jesus says to turn the other cheek. No, listen again to the passage. Now there was a Pharisee named Nicodemus, a leader. He came to Jesus by night, and he said to him, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do apart from the presence of God. And Jesus answered him, Very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God without being born from above. And Nicodemus said to him, How can anyone be born after having grown old? Can one enter a second time into the mother's womb and be born? And Jesus answers, Very truly I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God without being born of water and spirit. What is born of the flesh is flesh, and what is born of the spirit is spirit. Do not be astonished that I have said to you, you must be born from above. The wind blows where it chooses, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit. Can anyone enter a second time into the mother's womb and be born? This is what's going to be taken literally? Isn't that the way with fundamentalists then and now? They pick and choose what to take literally. And well, so do I. There are parts of the Bible that I take very literally. I think Jesus literally meant for me to love my neighbor and my enemy. I don't think that's a metaphor. So what drives our understandings or misunderstandings of the Bible? And now we're right back to theology. This matters. How do we understand God? If God is love, then we seek to understand the teachings of the Bible from that starting point. If God is judge, exclusive punisher, then that identity is the starting place for how we make sense of the Bible and the world. Nicodemus goes to Jesus at night, hiding. He's unwilling to admit that he might not have all the answers. And even though he has questions, he goes with his mind already made up. His theology is narrow. Jesus, it seems to me in this story from the Gospel of John, Jesus tries to open him up. The wind blows where it chooses, and you hear the sound of it, but you don't know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who's born of the Spirit. Al Mohler, is the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's not solely responsible for the fundamentalist takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention, but he, along with others, led the effort. He's recently been in the press over a statement he issued against women in ministry. One of my fellow Baptist women ministers, who is a minister of a church in Kentucky just down the road from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, Mary Alice Birdwhistle, wrote him an open letter in response to his condemnation. She has much to say to him, including these words that I want to share with you. She writes, "What I want to say to you today is this. I'm sorry your God is so small. I'm sorry your God is so small. That God can only speak through less than half of the human race. I'm sorry your God is so limited that God cannot be present with a person in pain, hold the hand of someone in the hospital, or offer a blessing of a newborn baby, at least not if these types of care are coming from a female pastor, or an LGBTQ+ pastor for that matter. As a child growing up in a Southern Baptist church, I learned to sing a song that said, 'My God is so big, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do.' I guess I took these words a little bit too seriously. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. Of course, it took me years to understand and embrace my calling as a pastor because I had never seen someone who looks like me do what I felt God calling me to do. I had been taught to draw such carefully constructed lines around God, and without even realizing it, I had begun to draw these lines around myself too. Over time, I realized that the picture I had been given of what a pastor looks like did not match the picture God was painting in my life. In order to pursue this calling, I would need to learn to color outside the lines. Thankfully, the winds of the Spirit blew through the locked doors of my mind and soul and unveiled a whole new spectrum of color and possibility for me. I don't know Reverend Mary Alice Birdwhistle, but I feel like she should come sit by me. As you know, I also grew up Southern Baptist, and I sang the song she references. My God is so big, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. So expansive, so open, so welcoming. I've had to learn again and again how true these words are. That God is so big, so much bigger than any of our restrictions. Jesus is trying to tell us this surely. The wind blows where it chooses, and you hear the sound of it, but you don't know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who's born of the Spirit. Our lection today also contains an oft-quoted verse, a verse so famous it's known to many simply by its location in the Bible, John 3:16. It might do well for folks to read it again, though, because it starts, "For God so loved the world." God so loved the world. If we're starting from love, then how do we get to these places of condemnation and exclusion and abuse? For God so loved the world. Love is the place to start. I'm sorry that the leaders of our state have drawn such small lines around God. I'm sorry their God is so small, so oppressive, so restrictive, so vindictive. I pray that the winds of the Spirit will blow their limited theologies open. And in the meantime, we who follow in the expansive way of God, we must continue to do what we can in every way we can to care for, protect, and welcome. Theology matters. Metaphors and models for God matter, and it's imperative that we examine them, keep the ones that are helpful, and discard the ones that are harmful. So, my friends, on this Trinity Sunday, with whatever the Trinity may or may not mean to us, perhaps we need a reminder that theology matters, belief matters. How we understand God's work in the world has a real impact on people. It leads to help or harm. There is so much harm being done in our state and elsewhere. Surely the God of expansive love is calling us to be part of the help. So what can we do? We can contact our leaders, we can sign petitions, we can vote, we can help others vote. We can speak up loud and clear for the God of welcome and love. For my God is so big, so expansive, so loving and welcoming. And I know yours is too. Amen.